You know that moment when you realize you've been played? When everything clicks into place and you see the whole chessboard for what it really is? Well, let me tell you about the day I got fired by some kid who thought he knew better than me. The day that changed everything. My name is Garrett Palmer, I'm 48 years old, and I just watched a 25-year-old punk learn the hardest lesson of his privileged life. The conference room looked like corporate purgatory. Beige walls, beige blinds halfway down like they couldn't decide whether to let the light in or keep it out. Those fake leather chairs that squeak every time you move. And right in the middle of it all sat the human embodiment of everything wrong with modern business, Ryan Palmer. Yeah, same last name. The CEO's son. Ryan didn't even stand when I walked in, just sat there in his expensive suit that hung wrong on his skinny frame, tapping a manila folder like he was about to perform the world's most pathetic magic trick. His smirk told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. "Garrett," he said, like he'd been practicing saying my name. "Glad you could make it." Brooke from HR sat next to him, clipboard in her trembling hands. Poor woman looked like she hadn't slept in days, probably because she knew she was about to help throw gasoline on a fire. Ryan leaned back, fingers laced behind his head like some hotshot CEO from a Netflix show. "We're streamlining, innovating, evolving. Unfortunately, some legacy structures aren't aligned with our vision going forward." He tapped that folder again. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Also, standard note, but I'll say it myself, do not rehire. Just to keep things clean." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. Brooke tried to pick up her script, voice thin as paper. "As of today, your employment with the company is officially concluded. You're required to return all company property and refrain from disclosing any proprietary." Ryan cut her off with a wave. "Come on, Brooke, let's not make this clinical. Garrett's a grown-up, he knows how these things go." I finally sat down, slow and measured, opened the folder and started reading, line by line. Not skimming, reading. It seemed to unnerve them, watching me calmly take apart their little bomb while the timer still ticked. Severance, 2 weeks. Stock options, voided. Access, revoked by end of day. Rehire status, blacklisted. There was even a clause about social media conduct, like I was the type to vent on Facebook between cat videos and political rants. I picked up the pen, rolled it between my fingers. "Any questions?" Brooke asked, voice brittle. Ryan answered for me. "No, this comes from the top. Total restructure. Honestly, it's not personal. You've just been outpaced. This company moves fast now. We can't afford to be sentimental." I smiled at that. Not warm, more like the smile you give someone who tells you the sun rises in the west and you decide it's not worth explaining physics. I signed, initialed, flipped pages, signed again. The pen barely made a sound. Ryan blinked. "You're taking this well." Still no words from me. Just a small nod, like agreeing with a waiter about a good choice. He tried again. "Seriously, no hard feelings." My eyes lifted, meeting his for the first time. "You're very proud of yourself, aren't you?" That one sentence deflated the room. Brooke froze. Ryan's smirk faltered just a fraction. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," he said, sharper now. "The board agrees." I stood up. Didn't take the folder. Didn't ask for a copy. My phone buzzed once in my pocket and I ignored it. Just picked up my briefcase and turned toward the door. Behind me, Ryan said something else. Some parting shot about finding my next chapter or all the best. It didn't land. He sounded like a boy playing CEO on Bring Your Kid to Work Day. Brooke opened the door, lips pressed together like she was holding back a secret. I stepped into the hallway and felt every eye watching me leave. Some pitied me. Some were grateful it wasn't them. Most were too scared to look away. I didn't break stride. Not when my security badge beeped red at the exit scanner. Not when my email locked out mid-scroll on my phone. Not when the elevator ride down felt like dropping through 15 years of my life. No fight, no yelling, not even a whispered threat. But beneath that calm surface, something old had just woken up, something they'd all forgotten about. I walked to my car, a steel gray Honda, practical and unremarkable to anyone except people who notice understated reliability. Slid into the driver's seat, locked the door, and sat for exactly 10 seconds, just breathing. Then, like a surgeon prepping for the most important operation of his career, I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out a matte black USB drive wrapped in an old microfiber cloth. It looked like nothing special, just a scratched, fingerprint-smudged memory stick. But inside that little device lived ghosts, documents, agreements, clauses from a time before this company had a name people could pronounce, before the board was even a thing, before Ryan existed in any capacity other than a bratty kid stealing appetizers at investor dinners. I plugged the drive into my dashboard. The car's screen flickered, then blinked green. A single menu appeared. Execute Legacy Protocol. I touched the screen once, then pulled out my phone. One contact, no name. I pressed call. The voice answered on the second ring. No greeting, just silence. Activate the clause, I said. All of it. The line went dead. And that's when the real game began. 17 floors above me, embedded in the compliance department like a sleeping lion, Wade Morrison was scrolling through expense reports when a single email dropped into his inbox. No subject line, no sender address. Just a one-word body, activated. He stared at it, then glanced at the Slack channel where someone had just posted. Was that Garrett who just walked out? Wade closed his laptop without replying. He stood, walked to the far wall of his office, and unlocked the tall gray cabinet no one ever touched. Inside were paper files, legal originals, and a single sealed manila envelope marked Founders Equity Protocol, in event of hostile action. His hands shook only a little as he pulled it out. Across the floor, the company buzzed with nervous energy, people whispering, gossip traveling faster than email servers could handle. Someone had already photoshopped a meme of Ryan as a Game of Thrones character. Funny for now. Wade slid back into his chair and opened the envelope. Clause 14.2b, in the event of involuntary termination initiated without majority board vote or founder consent, control rights, voting leverage, and access reinstatement will revert to the original founding shareholder identified as Palmer G. This clause is immutable, binding, and preempts all bylaws adopted post-Series A. He leaned back, blew out a slow breath, opened his secure DOJ contact form, and selected the drop-down labeled Suspicious Activity Report, Executive Action. Under Details, he typed, Termination of G. Palmer, executed by non-board member R. Palmer. Potential violation of voting trust. Clause 14.2b activated. Immediate legal review advised. He attached the clause scan and pressed send, then reached for the bottle of antacids in his drawer and popped two. Cross town, I merged onto the freeway with clinical precision and smiled without warmth. This wasn't revenge. This was insurance. 15 years of building quietly, fixing problems, cleaning up messes so the suits could smile in interviews and slap each other's backs at rooftop parties. Let them call me old. Let them call me obsolete. They forgot who drafted the architecture. They forgot who held the real keys. But the system didn't forget. Now it was awake. You want to know how this all started? Go back to March 2009. The office wasn't some sleek glass tower with kombucha taps and meditation pods. It was the back room of an abandoned print shop in Palo Alto that still smelled like toner and failure. The windows didn't open. The Wi-Fi cut out every time someone microwaved leftovers. The heating only worked if you kicked the breaker box like it owed you money. I didn't care. I was 33, sleep-deprived, caffeinated beyond medical safety, and convinced I could build something better than the dead-eyed corporations chewing up workers one non-compete clause at a time. The housing market had just crashed, my consulting business was circling the drain, and I had exactly $3,200 in my checking account. So when Howard Palmer, Ryan's father, the man who would eventually become CEO, pitched me on joining something special, I laughed in his face. But he didn't flinch. Just slid a folder across the wobbly IKEA desk and said, I can't pay much, but I can offer a seat at the table. A real one. I opened it. Founders Agreement. LLC documents. He'd left space for me to fill in my own terms. Smartest thing he ever did. Dumbest, too. I spent 3 days drafting my employment clause. Not with desperation, but with the cold clarity of someone who knew exactly what value looked like and how rarely men recognized it when it wasn't wearing a suit and an ego. I didn't ask for a fancy title, just co-founder. Didn't demand a huge salary. We didn't have one to offer anyway, just 51% of the original Class A shares. But then came the genius part. a clause buried in a section titled Operational Authority and Founding Equity Rights. On paper, it looked like boilerplate legalese, but the wording was surgical. In the event of termination without majority vote from the founding board, and in the absence of formal equity sale or transfer, all operational and voting rights revert to the founding signatory, herein designated as Palmer, G. I brought it to Howard and watched him squint at it like it was written in ancient Greek. We were sitting in a Starbucks because the print shop's heat was broken again. "What's this mean exactly?" he asked, tapping the line with a chewed-up pen. I sipped my coffee. "It means if you try to screw me later without doing it properly, I get the keys to the kingdom back." He laughed. "Like a safety net?" "No," I said, locking eyes with him. "Like a dead man's switch." He shrugged and signed. Back then, he needed me more than I needed him. I had the technical background, the operations experience, the ability to actually build something that worked. He had the vision and the gift of gab that could charm investors. And for years, I earned it. I built the compliance structure that saved us during the Series B audit in 2011. I patched the HR disaster after Howard's messy second divorce spilled into the office in 2013. I rewrote every operations manual after the data breach we swore never happened in 2016. I held that company together with spreadsheets, all-nighters, and problem-solving skills that no one ever saw because I made it look easy. When Ryan was still learning how to parallel park, I was negotiating vendor contracts that kept the lights on. When Ryan was pledging his frat in college, I was debugging the payment system that processed our first million in revenue. When Ryan was backpacking through Europe on Daddy's credit card, I was building the infrastructure that would eventually scale to support 200 employees. But slowly, as the company grew and went through funding rounds, the story changed. Howard became the visionary CEO. The new hires became his team. The board became his board. And me? I became operations lead on the org chart and got left out of Slack channels I used to create. No one read the old documents anymore. They just assumed the new bylaws and diluted cap tables had somehow overwritten the past. They figured my equity had been watered down to nothing through all the funding rounds. But equity isn't a feeling. Control doesn't evaporate just because the office gets an espresso machine and standing desks. And I watched it all happen, letting them forget, letting them assume I was content to fade into middle management obscurity. All while I quietly declined every secondary sale, every buyout pitch, every "it's just paperwork" email from the new legal team. Because my clause only worked if my equity stayed above 50%. And it had for exactly 15 years, 2 months, and 17 days. I never sold a single share, not one. That's why I hadn't screamed when Ryan fired me. That's why I hadn't begged or negotiated or made a scene. Because the moment he signed his name on that termination form, without board vote, without founder notification, without any of the protocols I'd quietly embedded like legal landmines throughout our corporate structure, he triggered the clause. And now every executive decision made since that moment was sitting on a foundation built of sand. The beautiful part? He had no idea what was coming. It started like most disasters do, quietly, with someone underpaid pressing a button they didn't fully understand. At exactly 10:54 a.m., the receptionist saw a man in a navy windbreaker step through the glass doors. He didn't fumble with the check-in tablet or flash a visitor's badge. Just walked up, flipped open a leather ID case and said, "Special Agent Colton Hayes, Financial Crimes Division. I need to speak with someone in leadership." Amanda, fresh out of college and 2 weeks into the job, blinked. "Do you have an appointment?" The agent didn't blink back. "I have a federal subpoena tied to executive activity in this building. Get whoever runs this place before I start pulling data requests." She picked up the phone with shaking hands. Upstairs, the board was clustered around the executive floor's marble counter, pretending to care about Ryan's TED Talk-style pitch about vision scalability. The kid had slides. Actual printed slides. Some included his own quotes in bold font. "And that's why," Ryan was saying, gesturing with one AirPod in like it gave him authority, "I believe this transition is about narrative alignment, not just operational shifts. We're rewriting the company's story." His audience nodded with the glazed expressions of people praying for a fire drill. Then Lisa from legal poked her head in. We've got a situation. There's a federal agent downstairs, Financial Crimes Division, Says he needs to speak to leadership. Everyone exchanged confused looks, half smiles spreading like maybe this was an elaborate practical joke. Ryan smirked. Relax. Probably a vendor compliance check. We had that wire transfer audit last month, right? I think it's serious, Lisa whispered. He brought files. 5 minutes later, Agent Hayes was in the 12th floor conference room they called the aquarium because of its glass walls and the way everyone could watch the sharks feeding. Hayes didn't sit, didn't accept water, didn't smile. He placed a thick manila folder on the table and opened it with slow, methodical movements. 72 hours ago, he began, we received a suspicious activity report from your compliance department, filed anonymously with proper credentials and security clearances. That report detailed discrepancies in internal approvals, executive expense redirections, and sudden changes to high-level personnel access without proper authorization protocols. Ryan raised a hand. Look, Agent Hayes, I'm sure whatever... I'm not finished, Hayes said, voice flat as concrete. The SAR referenced a terminated employee with long-standing control privileges, Garrett Palmer. The room went still. You could hear the air conditioning humming. I'm here because our investigation cross-referenced a contract clause buried in your early incorporation filings, a clause that was activated via legally binding automated signal roughly 30 minutes after Mr. Palmer's employment was terminated. A low murmur spread through the room. Shane, the CFO, shifted uncomfortably. We ended his position this morning. Standard restructuring. Hayes turned a page in his folder. And who authorized the termination? All eyes slid to Ryan like he was suddenly radioactive. Ryan cleared his throat, trying for confident but landing somewhere around defensive. I did. Well, within my authority, I'm Chief Vision Officer. My father delegated restructuring oversight while he's abroad on medical leave. Your father being Howard Palmer, current CEO? Yes. Hayes flipped another page. Currently out of the country, unreachable according to your own staff and according to our travel records. Last seen boarding a flight to Zurich 6 days ago. So at this exact moment, you are the highest-ranking executive on site? I suppose so. Hayes nodded once. Then you'll be answering the next set of questions. In private, with counsel present. The legal team stiffened. Someone from the board said, Wait, what exactly are you implying here? Agent Hayes didn't answer immediately. He just picked up his folder, nodded toward the inner boardroom and said, Let's go. Ryan followed, considerably paler than he'd been 10 minutes earlier. Inside the inner boardroom, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment Hayes opened his folder again. No PowerPoint, no corporate buzzwords, just paper, thick, weighty documents that smelled like consequences. Here's a vendor invoice for $84,000, processed through a Shell LLC registered in Nevada. Same mailing address as one of your executive assistants, who listed this company as her side business on LinkedIn 2 years ago. He slid it across the table. Here's another, $112,000 for strategic consulting. No hours logged, no deliverables documented, no contact information beyond a Gmail address that traces back to a P.O. box in Delaware. Another sheet. A pause that felt like a blade hanging over the table. And here's an expense reimbursement approved by you personally for $1,300 for what appears to be a private villa in Cabo San Lucas, listed under Client Retreat. Cross-referencing internal calendars, no clients were present, just you and someone identified as J. Martinez in the booking notes. The room was silent except for the sound of people breathing too carefully. Ryan tried to inject swagger into his voice. Okay, I see what this is. You found some sloppy bookkeeping. We'll tighten up procedures, run it through legal. Problem solved. Hayes didn't blink. Sloppy bookkeeping doesn't usually trigger federal SARs with language like attempted concealment of founder control clause activation and potential securities fraud through unauthorized executive action. He let that hang in the air like smoke from an electrical fire. What I need to know right now is who authorized the termination of Garrett Palmer and under what legal authority that termination was executed. Wade Morrison, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. I received the HR termination form this morning. It had Ryan's signature, but there was no accompanying board resolution, no founder consultation documentation. It was filed like a standard at-will termination, not a C-suite or founder-level exit. He glanced at Ryan. Which is legally problematic. Ryan's face flushed. Are you kidding me? He was middle management. Operations was in his title. He wasn't even a VP on the org chart. Wade's expression didn't change. His original contract predates the org chart. The title structure was reorganized around existing roles, not the other way around. He was dead weight, Ryan snapped, louder now. Half the staff didn't even know what he did day to day. Funny, Wade said quietly. Yet somehow everything still worked perfectly. Systems ran smoothly. Compliance stayed clean. Problems got solved before they became crises, almost like someone competent was handling the details while everyone else focused on vision boards and synergy meetings. Lisa leaned forward, panic starting to edge into her voice. Ryan, did you review Garrett's original contract before finalizing the termination? Because I sure didn't review it. I didn't even know we needed to. Ryan waved dismissively. I don't need to review every employment contract. That's what I pay legal for. Agent Hayes raised a finger, stopping all conversation. That contract, Mr. Palmer, includes a clause that directly affects operational control of this company. If triggered improperly, it could invalidate any decisions made under your assumed authority, especially if you were never granted formal controlling officer status through proper corporate channels. The room went dead quiet. Ryan stammered, Look, I've been acting on behalf of my father for months. There is no written delegation on file, Lisa interrupted, her voice thin. He mentioned it verbally in a few meetings, but legal never documented any formal transition of authority. Technically, Howard Palmer is still the only authorized CEO and decision-maker. Hayes tapped his pen against the table. So the person who authorized the firing of what appears to be a co-founder is not legally empowered to make such decisions, has no documentation granting such authority, and failed to review a foundational contract that directly controls the ownership structure of this company. Ryan stood up, pacing now. This is ridiculous. He's gone. He signed the papers. We locked him out of the building. What's he going to do? File a lawsuit? Complain to HR? He doesn't have to, Wade said steadily. The clause isn't about grievances or wrongful termination. It's about automatic reversion of control rights. The moment you filed that termination without proper authority, you triggered a legally binding mechanism that restored his decision-making power. Ryan stopped pacing. We'll fix it. I'll call legal. We'll amend the record, override whatever clause he thinks he owns. Hayes closed his folder with a sound like a coffin lid. You can't override what was never properly superseded. The original incorporation documents still govern this company, and according to those documents, you just handed majority control back to the one person who built this place from the ground up. Nobody spoke after that. Outside the glass walls, employees continued their normal Tuesday routines, completely unaware that the corporate structure governing their paychecks had just collapsed like a house of cards. And 5 miles away, I was finishing my coffee and checking my watch, knowing that any minute now my phone would ring. Because some lessons can only be taught the hard way. Hayes stood up, not rushed, just deliberate. The kind of movement that signals the end of negotiations and the beginning of consequences. This entire organization has been making decisions under the false belief that Mr. Palmer held no operational authority. If his control has been reactivated, then any major decisions made since his termination, executive hires, vendor contracts, financial filings, even board resolutions, may be legally invalid. He paused, letting that sink in like water into concrete. And if those decisions resulted in profit, loss, or public reporting discrepancies that weren't properly authorized, that becomes a federal securities matter. Ryan tried to speak, couldn't. The room had completely turned against him. Even the board members who used to laugh at his jokes now stared like they were seeing him for the first time. Hayes closed his briefcase with a snap that echoed like a gunshot. I need access to all internal communications relating to his termination, and I'll need the board to remain on site for further review while we sort out who actually has authority to make decisions around here. Shane, the CFO, ran a hand down his face. Jesus, is he coming back? Wade Morrison didn't look up from his notes. He never left. You just didn't notice he still held the deed to the house while you were redecorating the kitchen. That's when my phone rang. I was sitting in a coffee shop across the street, watching my old office building through the window, drinking tea, checking emails, completely calm, like I was waiting for a bus that I knew was coming right on schedule. Unknown number, but I knew who it was. I let it ring twice, then answered. No rush, no performance. Just waited. Ryan's voice came through shaky and desperate. Garrett, there's been some confusion. The board would like to discuss a possible resolution. Clarify terms. We'd really like to invite you back into the conversation. I looked up at that glass tower, the one I'd helped build from nothing. Saw all those people scrambling around like ants in a jar someone just shook. Ryan, I said, stirring my tea with one hand, let me ask you something. When you fired me this morning, did you actually read my contract? Silence on the other end. Then, look, we can work this out. Whatever legal technicality you think you found, it's not a technicality, I said. It's a dead man's switch. I built it into the foundation 15 years ago because I knew someday someone exactly like you would show up. More silence. Here's what's happening right now, I continued. Agent Hayes is explaining to your board that every decision you've made since 10:30 this morning is legally questionable. Every contract you've signed, every expense you've approved, every hire and fire, all of it needs to be reviewed because you never had the authority to make those decisions in the first place. I could hear him breathing hard. This is insane. My father put me in charge. Your father mentioned it in a meeting. That's not the same as legal delegation of authority. And even if it was, he doesn't have the power to override founder control clauses without board approval. We'll fix it, he said, voice cracking now. We'll get Dad back from Switzerland. We'll have the board ratify everything retroactively. I took another sip of tea. Ryan, you're not understanding. The moment you fired me without following proper protocols, you triggered an automatic reversion. I'm not asking for my job back. I already have it. I'm not negotiating for control. I already own it. The line went quiet for almost 30 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. What do you want? I want you to remember this moment, I said, because this is what happens when you mistake experience for obsolescence, when you think process and compliance are just paperwork that gets in the way of your vision. I stood up from my table, left money for the tea, and started walking toward the building. I'll be up in 5 minutes, I said. Have security reactivate my access. And Ryan, next time you want to fire someone, maybe read their contract first. I hung up. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt different than it had 6 hours earlier. Same elevator, same buttons, same music. But now I was riding it as the majority owner of the company, not as some middle manager getting escorted out. The reception area went dead quiet when I stepped off. Amanda, the same kid who'd been scared of Agent Hayes, just stared. Someone whispered my name. Phones stopped ringing. I walked past the cubicles, past the conference rooms where I'd been meetings I'd built the processes for, past the offices of people who thought I was gone forever. The aquarium's glass doors were closed, but I could see everyone inside. The entire board, Agent Hayes with his files spread out, Ryan sitting at the head of the table looking like he'd aged 10 years in one day. I opened the door and stepped inside. Gentlemen, I said, taking the empty chair at the other end of the table, I believe we have some things to discuss. Agent Hayes looked at me, then at his folder. Mr. Palmer, just to confirm, you're the founding shareholder referenced in Clause 14.2b? That's correct, and you currently hold majority voting control of this company. As of 10:30 this morning, yes. Hayes nodded and closed his folder. Then I'll leave you to sort out your internal governance issues. Just remember, any major decisions made today will need to be properly documented and authorized going forward. He gathered his papers and headed for the door. Paused and looked back at Ryan. Oh, and Mr. Palmer? The younger Mr. Palmer. Those expense irregularities we discussed? Someone with actual authority will need to address those. Soon. Then he was gone, leaving us alone in the aquarium. I looked around the table. Board members who'd ignored me for years. Executives who'd written me off as legacy overhead. Ryan, who thought firing me was just another Tuesday morning task. So, I said, settling back in my chair, who wants to start by explaining how we got here? And that's how a 48-year-old guy who supposedly didn't matter anymore reminded a whole company who really built the house they were living in. The system never forgets. It just waits for someone stupid enough to wake it up. Some lessons, as they say, can only be taught the hard way, and class was now in session.